Hello and welcome back to another episode of Upon Request. My name is Mikel Lejean. I'm here with my co-host Eric Johnson. We're sadly missing Carolina Santamaria, who is in Cartagena, Colombia, so feel really bad for her. And we're joined by Jesse Bludorn and Zevon Toplin. It's Zevon Toplin. I'm gonna mess that up every time. I'm sorry. We're gonna be talking about the Apo.Ha-Ha.calypse, which is a climate comedy event that Jesse and Zevon have been organizing. And Jesse is also the director of Carmack Collective and Carmack Studios, which have been trying to put together these arts, climate, culture, and these events that are focused on those themes. And Zevon is an incredible improv, sketch, and everything comedian, and last year worked on a political sketch show for Adam McKay. So we're really excited to have both of you here. I gave an intro telling other people about who you are, but maybe you can start us off, Jesse, by sharing a little bit more about what people should know about you and what you want them to know about you.
Yeah, well, first of all, thanks so much for having us. I'm Jessie Bludorn. I would say you kind of nailed it, Mikkel. The context of my work is mostly the intersection of comedy and climate. I run and founded Carmack Productions, which is my multimedia production studio focused on climate comedy. Right now, we have this incredible live show, Apo.Ha-Ha.calypse, in New York City. And I'm also in pre-production on a web series coming soon and some other exciting projects, so stay tuned. And then, of course, the Carmack Collective, which is my foundation focused on dismantling the fossil fuel industry. So not a big goal, just a small goal, just just keeping it realistic. And for listeners, Mikkel has been a core member of our advisory board at the Carmack Collective since its inception in 2022, I guess, is when you came on board. So
I think that's right.
Mikkel's the real deal and has been so instrumental in shaping how all of this work comes to life. So shout out Mikkel.
My gosh, we can just continue on the compliments for me, actually.
If
The
everybody
entire
can just
episode.
share something kind about Mikkel now.
Yeah. Zevon, we met about 15 minutes ago, so
Yeah.
tough task, but you can also share more about yourself.
Yeah, so you hit a couple of the uh main bullet points. I primarily have a background in theater and some more uh what you might call traditional environments, but then also in a lot of guerrilla or street or more physical visual theater styles and context. And then also I've run a variety of arts or activist spaces in New York City, with a strong focus on them being financially accessible. Yeah, and then past several years, I've been involved in various improv or sketch comedy worlds, and yeah, I'm currently performing and writing and producing these shows with Jesse.
So, well, it's so great to have you both. I'm really pumped about this topic. I think for our listeners who are folks that are trying to be progressive in a world that feels ultra not progressive, I think people feel like really paralyzed by like what to do and how to show up, and always are like perfectionist about like, if I'm not this thing, then I can't be at this rally. If I'm not this type of person, then I can't really contribute to any type of movement. And one thing that I was like really starting to think about when we were organizing this episode was there's so many entry points of how people can show up and counteract what is the status quo. And the work that y'all are doing around climate and comedy is one of those really cool. It feels really novel, like a new idea, like an emergent idea. But I'm really excited to like hear more about how this came to be. Like, what are your inspirations, and a little bit more about this topic in general, climate and comedy. Like, why be funny about something so serious? But before we kind of get into the content of the episode and what we really want to be talking about with climate and comedy, I also want to take a moment and be like, there's actually an event coming up. We're probably going to get this out by the end of March. So there's going to be a little bit of lead time for people to get their tickets, to join in, to be here if they're in the New York area. Want to kick it over to either one of you to kind of share what's the event that's coming up, why people should join, and anything else that you want to share about it.
Okay, I'll start, then Z, you can weigh in. So our next big show, our next big Apo.Ha-Ha clip show is April 22nd, which is Earth Day 2025. And we're putting on a big climate variety show at Littlefield in Brooklyn with our friends at Yellow Dot Studios, which is Adam McKay's climate focused nonprofit production studios. We're so excited to have them on board, and it's going to be a huge show. This will have been public by the time the pod comes out. So we're excited that the headliner for our show will be Roy Wood Jr., huge star, a comedy icon. We're so thrilled he's agreed to do it. And we're also going to have a really rich lineup of incredible emergent talent from across New York. So if you're into comedy, you're going to know some of those names. It's going to be so, so cool. Tickets are on sale now at the link in bio. I don't know, wherever it is in the show notes in the bio. We'll make sure that's available. And for updates on the show moving forward, you can follow us at Apo.Ha-Ha-calypse on Instagram. And we'll also put that in the bio because you probably have no idea how we spell that. Anything you want to add, Z?
No, I think you hit it. I think that's great. I'm really excited for this show as well.
Sweet. Nice. Well, we'll make sure to include the link wherever we can on the promo for this. So definitely keep your eyes peeled for that. And I'm also quickly learning that I'm mispronouncing it maybe every single time. I don't know if I've quite nailed it yet.
Okay.
What's your tips? What's your tips before we get into
Okay.
it?
Nate's our third producer, not here today, had to send me like 8 voice notes on how he thought we should pronounce it before I did practice it correctly. So it's basically like you're saying apocalypse, but you're just smushing haha in the middle. Apocalypse.
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 I don't know why, but I'm like leaning towards like a British accent every time I say it.
That was how we conceived it in
Apocalypse.
the
Yeah.
beginning. That was one of our
Or like
first.
someone from like the East India Company, just like they're the ones
Yeah.
saying it.
I just was
That's
like, you know
exactly
what's
what we
hot?
wanted.
British accent.
Yeah.
And that's kind of how we got there.
Perfect. Well, yeah, we're gonna keep on figuring it out as we go. Every time I mess it up, make sure to point it out, and then we'll have a ball of a time on it. Well, as we, like as we're starting this off, I feel like it's always really interesting because there's like an idea of like what I have, like why this theme is important, why it matters, like, and I think just remembering that like there's people that are listening that are probably trying to figure out like why this matters to them. So to make it easier, like want to start out with like maybe your thoughts or your reflections of like why should people care about climate and like comedy, and what is it about this theme that spoke to you? And so you can start with either one of those and kind of share, but maybe we start with Z and then Jesse if you want to share after.
Yeah. I think I was recently reading this book that was more of say like a critical philosophical sort of text on what comedy is. I thought one thing I was reading that was really fascinating about it was that a lot of things that are funny to us are revealing places where they're revealing places where maybe our thinking is very inflexible. So I mean, they even use this idea pretty broadly. So even something like slapstick, like something like someone slipping on a banana peel and falling, like being funny. At least this one particular writer was theorizing that maybe that's funny because we have this idea as humans that we're these really highly metaphysically extremely like superior and non-physical beings, and then by slipping on that banana peel we're revealing that actually, yeah, we're just silly bags of meat trying to figure it out. And so I think like I think that for me one of the things that in terms of inflexibility I'd say is the way our society is addressing the climate crisis right now, that we're not making the moves that we have to preserve our natural world or to preserve human life or human safety or human health, right? Or non-human health. And I think that because there's that across society, that huge inflexibility, it's a really great opportunity to make something that is really potent comedy. So I think from a comedic standpoint, that's really cool. And then, of course, I think that people who are in activist or progressive movements or what have you, people's movements, often get a reputation for not being fun and not being funny. Like, I think that's like really not that they could get a reputation for being dour. And I think it's important to recognize that fun and joy is really powerful, and that's important to incorporate into any sort of people's movement.
I love that. God, that's a tough answer to follow. That was really good, Z. I agree with all of that. I think also taking a more personal angle on it. I don't know if any listeners will relate to this, but I'm also a comedian, and that sort of was like my passion project that existed in the background of what I thought was my quote more important work as an organizer and a funder. And I felt like it was a special treat, not like real work, to be doing comedy or putting out media and entertainment. And I think it took me a long time going back, Mikkel, to your intro, is like we have to figure out how we get into this and like what the work is and like what we allow ourselves to do. And I think Z is exactly right that it's not an either or. Like comedy and joyful approaches to the work aren't a nice to have, they're a must have. And so I think one of the biggest influences for me in seeing that was, and this is not to plug a Carmack Collective grantee, but the Center for Media and Social Impact at American University just has some really incredible research on the sociological impact of comedy in helping people to um, open up their hearts and minds to progressive issues. So we've seen this in examples like how Modern Family, showing a gay couple and a gay family on TV, really changed people's minds about gay marriage, for example, because suddenly they, in a comedic way that really got their guard lowered, they saw, oh, well, like, if, I know Mitch and Cam from TV, so now I feel differently. Like, I don't know anyone else like that in my life. And so I think we have the opportunity to do that for climate as well. Climate, to Z's point, can be seen as such a like heavy topic. It can be seen as such an all or nothing perfectionist thing. Like, oh, you drive to work. Well, like, who are you to comment on blah, blah, blah? But it's like, we're all just out here trying to figure it out. And I think it's a much easier ask for people to come out to a comedy show and laugh than it is to be like, read this research paper and change your whole life.
Right on cue. Welcome in, Nate. So, fun fact, Nate did not show up at the time that we had scheduled. And so we had a plan to just roast Nate as soon as he joined. So, Jesse, you can start off with the roast.
it.
Then we go
Yes.
Z. And then Nate, you get to introduce yourself on the back heels of a roast session.
Dope.
I have to start the roast.
You don't have to. You
Z,
can
start the roast.
Yeah.
I'll
Well,
reply.
we were trying to figure out why you were late, and Jesse was like, "Oh, well, maybe he was late because he's in jail at a test that he was imprisoned, jailed after going to a Tesla protest yesterday, and that's why we haven't heard from him in 24 hours." And so, we were out here thinking that you were fighting a good fight, but in reality, you just been fucking around, dude. What's going on? What's going on?
I've heard better and less likely to be factual roasts, but nice try, Z.
Okay, so we're getting that score 0 out of 10.
Very well.
Is what you're saying, Nate? Wow, that's a good counter roast. But it's only a roast if it actually burns,
Well said.
Jesse, do you wanna go next, or do you feel like intimidated by Nate's response?
I'm not a good roaster. I either go not far enough or too far. And I'd love to not blow up our entire production partnership here today on the pod. So
Right, you have relationships to
I'm just
retain.
going to skip.
What we just learned though is that like just because there's someone telling you to do something doesn't mean you have to do it. And we know that Z is now a conformist and Jesse knows how to buck the trend.
Very well.
The deeper personalities revealed.
Which is a good balance.
Yeah, it's a good balance.
team.
And then how do you situate yourself in this grouping, Nate?
I'd say somewhere in the middle. I'm really ready to follow somebody else telling me they know better, but usually I'll try to pretend that I do first.
Famous.
Well, it's your time to share a little bit more about yourself and who you are. We were also kind of talking about like what brought this idea of like climate and comedy about and why, listeners should think of it as an important theme in general, like from your perspective. So if you want to do all of that in your intro, you should feel free to.
Yeah, amazing. Hello, thank you for having us. Sorry so much for being late. I was listening to DA Alvin Bragg talking just now at the New York Society for Ethical Culture, and he went over, and I completely forgot about our podcast. And I'm not gonna lie, like it was a little boring too. So I like it wasn't even exactly worth it. He was cool. Yeah, I have a background in theater and comedy. Comedy was like a first love. I think that was probably the thing that I most naturally did. Like if you can find an origin story in your childhood, I think the clearest one for me is comedy, because I did not think of doing theater professionally until I was like 21, and then ignored it again for another decade before committing myself to it. And about the time that I did fully commit to performance and storytelling, I became aware of the climate crisis, so founded a festival called the Sixth Fest, named after the sixth mass extinction event, which, fun fact, is happening, which is not very good. And so I've often heard that I need to be less drastic in my messaging about an emergency, which is very fucking strange comment for like communications about the climate crisis are often critiqued for being like too scary when it is an emergency. I'm sorry, that's what an emergency is, not a good situation. So I think it is good to be honest, but like all the way swinging to the other side of the spectrum from something that's very scary, like our show's name, Apo.Ha-Ha.calypse, combines the fact that this is not a great situation, but we actually can laugh about it. I was just talking with somebody here about the power of comedy to include people in something that they may otherwise want to push away, which I would say 99% of the time that I mention the climate crisis, that is the impulse with your average person. Like 99% of the people in the population don't actually want that conversation to continue for very long. I talk about it every day. So that's, very anecdotal evidence. But if you have people laughing, they actually kind of lean in instead of push away. People like to laugh. It's a great feeling, especially about stuff that is, I often bring up the AA laugh. I'm a member of Alcoholics Anonymous, and you can say the worst things in an AA meeting and somebody will laugh. Like the worst things that could be said, you could admit to doing the worst things that you could admit, or experiencing the worst things. Like somebody talking about how they've ended up like crazy and homeless and without a family, and somebody in the room is like, ha ha, like out of recognition. And that, in that, are you saved from the thing that drives you towards homelessness and your family falling apart, because somebody's like, I fucking see you. That is so powerful. The like collectivizing that happens when you laugh about something that could otherwise tear you apart or make you want to like hide that truth. Again, back to the truth of the climate crisis. I'm a member of Extinction Rebellion, and the first demand is to tell the truth. And we can do that through comedy in a way that like people don't give a shit about science and facts. We know that very well. Like what like human beings don't, we're not persuaded by facts. We're persuaded by charisma and emotions. And so comedians got that if they're worth their salt.
Thank you so much for that. And it's interesting hearing your reflections, because I think it's like all three of the perspectives that y'all have brought forward about like why this is important really speaks to my brain. Like it helps me understand and like reframe and kind of come at this from like a different perspective. And one of the things that I was thinking about, I think it might have been when you were talking, Z, was about Amitav Ghosh. Whenever I talk about arts and culture, I always bring up Amitav Ghosh, who's a climate fiction writer. And I remember going to a talk back in the day when I was part of like a working group at NYU that was trying to bring together scholars and academics and people that were activists and artists in the movement together around this concept and around the concept of arts and culture and climate. And I remember him basically saying that humans are predisposed to not absorb really heavy magnitude of things, right? Like telling someone about the end of the world is a lot different than telling them a house is on fire. Like there's just it's like a predisposition to not be able to understand that. And what climate fiction and all these other art forms of communicating to people is about taking something that feels really dense, far away, incapable of understanding it, and drawing it down to human level. The the interpersonal ways that we can communicate are sometimes more effective, like you were talking about, Jesse, with like Modern Family. It's more effective at moving people's hearts and minds than here's a report that's 100 pages about exactly why the climate crisis is bad. People just don't respond to that. And I think it's really cool to see this newer concept of like climate and comedy and arts and culture, because I think it's also something that's missing generally from people. People are missing arts and culture. We're seeing it dismantled at every level of government, every level of society. There's been like a real shunning of the importance of arts and culture. And so I think reprising it for something as important as climate is also a really big mindset shift. It's something that could help our society reprioritize arts and culture, because it's another way that they can interact with something as big as climate change, but also interact with how moved they might be by it. Kind of wondering too, off of the intros that y'all have offered, is what, and I think it's coming up from like Nate, your one of the points that you were making of, yes, it's about how we communicate these concepts to people, but I think a little bit of what's coming up for me is like, how can people benefit from engaging in it, right? Like what this human response of like, there's almost different types of laughs to communicate your response to a thing. Like there's the affirmation laugh, there's the, I'm actually laughing out of my seat because that was so absurd. There's all these different ways that like a laugh communicates people's reaction to something. And I'm wondering, what are you hoping that people are taking away from their engagement with the topic? What have been some really cool ways that you've seen people respond to climate comedy, or just comedy in general, that you feel like is important for people to like kind of take away? I don't know.
I think on perhaps this is maybe more of like a practical organizing level than necessarily just a personal relationship with the what's going on stage. I think one really cool thing is having cultural spaces where a lot of the people coming to the shows that we've done so far have been very much in the activist community, and this is their day in day out. On the other hand, there are a lot of people who have come to the show who, one, aren't really involved, but are like, yeah, I definitely on an intellectual level know that the climate crisis is upon us and very scary, but maybe I don't know exactly how to get involved or what people are even trying to do to organize and address it. And maybe those people wouldn't have come out on a Friday or Saturday night to, come to a, hear, what did you say? Bragg, the DA, you said Alvin Bragg, like talk, maybe not everyone's going to the DA's, to hear a talk for hours, but people be like, "Oh yeah, I'll definitely come to a comedy show. That sounds really fun." And then they have fun there, and also it turns out that there are a lot of people who are available, who have the resources to tell to share and maybe give them some guidance or give them some opportunities to get involved with something that maybe they would want to get involved with, but they had no idea how. And I think that that's really important. That just the communal aspect, just being able to bring people together in the same space that ordinarily might not have been, I think is extremely useful and awesome and in itself. And I think also associating that with positivity is really important, that there is a community of people who are willing to look at these things in a positive way, sometimes darkly, but not necessarily in a nihilistic way as well, keeping it positive.
Yeah. I would also add, in addition to that, agree with all of that, Z. I think, Mikkel, you just referenced how our like cultural landscape is shrinking around us. And I think we definitely feel that in the comedic space as well. And I think as arts and culture and comedy in particular becomes more commercialized, I think it feels like there's a lot of pressure to only talk about things that will like definitely get a laugh, that definitely will sell. Like we're all trying to work, we're trying to make it work. And so I think something we're so excited about with this show, Apo.Ha.Ha.calypse, is creating a regular, safe incubation space for both activists and comedians who are trying to like create that overlap in the Venn diagram. So Z spoke to like the community space and how we're getting people plugged into movements and actions. But we also hope, and I think we're doing it successfully so far, that we're creating a show space where we're inviting comics to come in and like have a safe landing space to test new material that they've been thinking about. Comedy is like fundamentally observational, and like we want to talk about what's going on in our lives around us. And unfortunately, increasingly, that is climate disruptions of different types. You know, we're all starting to experience the very hot days. My grandparents had to evacuate 3 hurricanes in Florida last season. So, like, that was something I was dealing with. And so, naturally, it's going to start to come up in the stuff I want to write about if I'm given places where it's like definitely okay to test out some new jokes about something that might not land at the standard comedy club. And so, yeah, I think we've seen some great examples at our first couple of shows of comics who maybe haven't in the past talked about these kind of things, try out some new jokes and like just freaking crush, just absolutely land. They're so talented. As comics, and then for them to like take a shot at talking about the climate crisis and like what that means as like a new parent or like whatever their situation is, and then we hope that they'll feel like empowered to take those jokes out to all of the other places where they work.
I wanted to ask about sort of the community aspect of doing a live show also, because I think as humans, I think we've hit on this sort of theme. We like laugh so we don't cry. So that's like why we have funerals, why we have protests, and why we have like these spaces that are kind of intense, but we do it together. And it sounds like, at least to me, what is a little different for having a comedy show that's about climate is it's a place to be in community with that positivity framework, even if it is sort of like laughing because you're like, oh shit, this is really bad. Or like it feels like I shouldn't think that's funny that something horrible is about to happen. But to do that in a space that's like together with other people is something that I could see as personally being like, am I gonna go to this? I'm like, that sounds really appealing. And like I actually may go to an event that we're actually talking about on our show. Not to say that I wouldn't to the other people that we've had on before, but this one sounds like particularly like something that I would actually want to go to. So I just want to hear what you all think about the community aspect of not just with the comedians, but the audience as well.
Yeah, you're hitting it spot on. And Z was kind of saying exactly that as a desired effect that within the movements I mentioned being involved in one organization, but you very quickly are part of or working for with sometimes all of the organizations. And we're in New York City and it's like crickets. There are like 10 active members at most in any of these groups that make them really stay afloat. And like they may have broader membership than that, but like literally, even in New York City, it's maximum like 100 people max. And they used to, like just a couple of years ago, these same exact groups had like neighborhood chapters, like thousands of members within New York City. And some amount of that is just, is it super fun to show up to an agenda driven Zoom call once a week? Like where are the snacks, where's the laughter, where's the actual community, where like are we actually hanging out, or are we just like am I just tagging another thing to like add to my week, another work basically, volunteering. And like our culture is so isolation driven. We worry about our own bread and butter, our own roofs over our own heads. Like that is how a capitalist economy works. We are not a collectivist society, and we are paying the price for it. Mental health, climate, all of it, an authoritarian taking over. Like this is what comes out of the idea of like one person. And the more that we are like, nah, get into a room together, off of your screen, my gosh, what a novel experience. And then on top of that, it actually feels good. I leave recharged for like dealing with the rest of my life, which some of it is not bad, but it's work. And like we need each other. And if we have already tossed that baby out, then we're not going to be able to survive anything. On top of arriving late, I also have an event starting in just a couple minutes, so I will be signing off.
What
Yeah,
you're
I'm
about?
very
You just say that after talking about togetherness and how important it is, dude. You better be,
He's
exactly.
going to be together.
dude. You
Yeah,
better be
this
with
is a
some
this is
people who
a
have got snacks and who have got joy. over there.
We got snacks right here. Got some sparkling water, which I'm addicted to. We're gonna read a play about authoritarians. So
Great.
yeah,
What's your favorite sparkling water before you go?
I'm a sucker for the Trader Joe's brand actually, because it's affordable, but also the flavors are top notch.
Might I tempt you to try the Howls? Have you had the Howls one?
Dude,
That's also an affordable one.
The
Do you ever
the lemon
find
flavor, so good.
that the carbonation is a little aggressive
On Trader Joe's or just seltzer?
on Hal's specifically?
I like it. It makes me feel alive.
Because I love
boy.
the black raspberry or the black cherry flavor. Is that what it
Yes.
is? The
Yeah,
black cherry?
I think
Just,
so.
Whoa.
I'm a little assaulted throat wise.
But that makes me feel alive, you know, like in a numbing world. It just like the fact that like my life could be on the line because of esophageal like rupture is like kind of
So you're self harming with Hal's
yeah, truly.
sparkling water.
I
Okay.
love seeing
I
Nate
was-
trying to leave.
Yes.
Yeah.
Bye,
Yes,
Nate.
I was
This is
gonna
good
say
punishment. I want you to stay as long as
I was
possible.
gonna say that cherry vanilla was my favorite of the Trader Joe's song by that Jesse mentioned, the cherry, because there's just something to that kind of like soft but sweet.
Yeah. Well,
Um,
I also drink a lot of seltzer.
I know that we're all shouting out our show, but come out on Earth Day. We're having a banger and a regular hum at the Caveat starting in June. I might be the second person to say that, but good if I am, because
You know what? We did not reveal that.
we got a bunch going on. It's just starting, people. So come out. And I can't wait. I'm so sorry to be such a dick. Love and brag and authoritarian plays and community.
Honestly, both important. So thank you.
Yes,
Yeah,
Have a good
right?
one,
but it
Nate.
kind of seems like you're being really clear to us that you want to be in community, just not with the people here today on this call.
This is what's clear.
Jesse landed a roast. Jesse landed a roast, as was
There we
asked
go.
for. Ciao.
All right, bye,
All right,
Nate.
see ya.
What a segue. I don't know how to segue out of that. What I will say is my thought that I was having before Nate signed off, which is I don't know how you go from seltzer to this. This is super heavy, but I've been I don't know if y'all have like heard about the stories and like some of the motivations from folks during the AIDS crisis, but there's this like one quote that has like stuck out to me in the past week, which is you know, during the day we like buried the dead. We went to a protest in the afternoon, and then in the night we danced all night, kind of thing. And there's something about this, like I think we were missing it from COVID. COVID really fucked everything up, honestly. Like for our activist spaces, for like the over ballooning of like you know people's energy and time, but then like not being able to sustain that, and then also just like not being as fun. Like we've lost all our fun in like the activist
Dude,
space. It's
COVID
like
was not
actually
fun, and no one's even saying this.
no one said it yet.
No one said
No
this
one's.
shit.
I'm cutting edge and innovative with my analysis, but I do feel like we've really lost a shit ton of fun, and it's been really hard to reclaim. I think we're also in a whole like people forget it's like a whole new generation of people, like people that were experiencing COVID in high school are now like leaving college, you know, like and that's like really crazy to think about. So we just didn't have that like nice handoff or that transition into a new generation. Things aren't as fun. So I'm just like thinking about that as like folks are answering Eric's question, but I don't know if that has also come up for you, Jesse, as someone who comes out of the activist space and maybe also dealt with that transition and trying to figure out how do we imbue some more fun back into our activist spaces.
This isn't an answer. I just feel like I lately have always been telling people we need to make climate action sexy again. There's a lot of ways we can do that, but we just have to. Just have to. We have to make it fun. We have to make it sexy. Yeah. And like hopping on another Zoom call probably isn't going to get us there.
Got him.
I guess shout out to anyone who is turned on by that. What a way to live. That'd be really cool. I'm not that person. You guys probably aren't either. Yeah. I think the other thing I just want to like bring into the space is the sort of like emergent field of climate comedy is in and of itself a community. Like we're obviously not the first people to have thought of this idea. There's a lot of other really, not a ton, but you know, a fair number of really cool groups doing this. Yellow Dot, I mentioned Center for Media and Social Impact, and we could like keep naming people out. I think where we see our role in that community is just continuing to grow the space, like field building and also creating more regular grassroots space for things to emerge. I think what we noticed, and Z, you can weigh in here, but it felt to us in our sort of like ecosystem analysis, like there were a number of bigger players trying to create climate comedy, like Adam McKay's film Don't Look Up for Netflix. Incredible, groundbreaking. But that's kind of like at the top of the cultural pyramid. And most of the work that like Measy and Nate were doing as comics in New York was like on the indie grassroots level. And so it's like, cool, how do we create like the base of that funnel and like create small, regular test kitchen spaces where people can try stuff out, and then hopefully like the best of what works will rise to the top, and like maybe HBO will call, maybe it'll end up in someone's next special. So I think just to like name that we're building community with comedy, but like comedy is also in itself a community, and we want to be like a good member of that community and think about how everything fits together and how we can just continue to like grow the space in a collective way and never segment ourselves off.
Yeah, the analogy I'm thinking of that will resonate with like 0.4% of our listeners is like it's kind of like a farm league, right? Like you have to have a system of like people that are skilling up, that are maybe younger, that are a little bit less experienced to filter into like the more experienced, more breakthrough, more like big time kind of spaces. And without that, you run the course of just having like recycled faces that are on everything that is of that topic. So that's super helpful. Z, did you have any thoughts on that question or Eric's question, or just like thoughts that are surfacing for you?
Yeah, I'd say maybe this is a little more adjacent, but I think one thing that is a defining feature of a lot of comedians' experiences, whether that's, you know, stand-ups or improvisers or writers, the institutions that people often feel that they have to pass through, whether that's you know, a comedy theater or like a stand-up club or something like that, although they often paint themselves in a pretty progressive veneer, at least, or at least paying lip service to them, they like most people's experience going through those is really exploitative, like in terms of the amount of money that they have to pay into these systems, that or the amount that they are not getting paid for performing at shows where money is clearly being made. And I think that that experience can engender a lot of uh I think it can engender a lot of hopelessness when it comes to incorporating more serious political content into their what they're putting forward, because it seemed like a lot of the environment makes it feel like that would be somehow hypocritical or useless, when you know what I'm saying? Like, when the very institutions that you're using feel exploitative to you, but then are at the same time are like, oh no, but we're actually like trying to put forward something that is maybe changing society. It's hard to describe if you haven't been in those spaces, but sometimes there can be a little bit of, I don't know, talking on both sides of the mouth a little bit.
Feel like that's maybe some of the reason, like this like very hyper capitalist commercialization, like where things have to be marketable and sellable to like a vast majority of people. Do you think that that's what influences like this outsized growth or preference towards like conservative comedy? Like
Ooh,
I just am thinking about,
interesting.
you know, grassroots comedy and like how there was an era where culturally our arts and culture work was like very leftist, like the
Sure.
folk music, the comedy spaces, like it was working class at the very least, but now it doesn't even feel like that. So yeah, I don't know if that's what you're kind of alluding to,
Oh,
or
you know, it's
if it's totally
interesting.
different.
I was not even thinking about that, but that's also a really fascinating conversation. I think what I was talking about were like ostensibly like liberal institutions that behave in an exploitative way towards the people who are coming through them. But I think that in terms of like conservative comedy, that's really fascinating to me, like that phenomenon of like, at least in like the past several years, like the right wing, like often like claiming comedy is like almost like the almost like ironically is like their own safe space, right? And I think a lot of the time the idea is that it's like meant to be rebellious while also like espousing bigotry. You know what I mean? Like you have comedians making millions of dollars on a special just being like, geez, isn't it crazy how I can't say what I want to say anywhere, you know? And I think a lot of what is okay, so like I was recently watching this special online with this stand-up Anthony Jeselnik, who by the way is known for having extremely dark you know, provocative material, but he has this part where he's like, I'm against cancel culture, and everyone's like, yeah, woo, like yeah, fuck cancel culture. And then he's like, thank you. That's my impression of a shit comedian trying to blow up on Joe Rogan. You know what I mean? Because it's like you don't even have to have jokes anymore. He's like, he also start like also one of the early jokes. He's like, you know, I'm a comedian, and one of my responsibility as a stand-up comedian is I need to give you my personal opinion on the trans community. You know what I mean? And it's just like I don't know. I thought that whole shit was hilarious, man. Because I don't know. I feel like just leaning into the bigotry is I don't know. To me, it's pretty corny, but I don't know. I can't totally speak on what that phenomenon is linked to. I mean, maybe in terms of I don't know. I don't have enough evidence to really speak on it. But I also feel like a lot of like these sorts of like institutions that I was talking about that feel like liberal comedy institutions, maybe there's a feeling like these guys are full of it. So like one way to rebel against that is leaning into nastiness, but who knows? I truthfully don't know. I don't have a thesis on that.
Maybe that's part two.
I have a thesis. I think it's a little bit oversimplified. Mikkel, I'm curious to hear your thoughts. I think my thesis is there's been a fundamental de-investment in culture on the left. The right, especially the far right, is doing a much better job than the left at understanding the importance of seeding long-term cultural projects. So like going back to your farm league analogy, the right for the past, 50 years has been growing an incredibly large, not incredibly talented base of people across different cultural sectors to speak on these issues. I'm not going to remember the citation correctly, but have you guys seen that graphic that's been going around on social media of the podcast space?
Yeah.
I
It's
bet
like
you
the
know where it's from.
democracy.
Yeah.
I think I'll look up the survey. I'd literally just posted about it.
Okay. I know. I feel like we've both been looking at it. Okay, so Mikkel's going to put that in the show notes so everyone can reference, but it just kind of shows by viewership number, like biggest, I think it's specifically online podcasters and content creators. And you can see that that landscape in the current moment is by far dominated by the right. And it's like, okay, so what are we building on the left? I think the problem is a lot of things have gone to this like highly commercialized like studio model. So it's like if it's not a big Marvel movie that's gonna have like a 2000% ROI at the box office, then it's not worth investing in. And that is obviously not how we build a world worth living in. So I think that's also why we're so excited about something like this show and the other projects that are happening in Macau, like our broader climate cultural space, but also within the specific climate comedy world that's like, okay, probably our one show, unfortunately, will not topple Joe Rogan, but creating more of these spaces and expanding this world so that people can come in, can try stuff. Will the next left-wing Joe Rogan come out of a Ha-Ha-Ha-calypse? I
That's
don't know.
exactly that's
Come
what
to
I'm
our
gonna
show
give you.
on April 2nd and I guess find out.
The chart is from Meteor Matters for America, and it's like this bubble chart that just shows like it's actually, I think the like lowest on the right wing is like the largest on the left wing, and it's like Trevor Noah, which is all to say, like, also corporate leftist is not what we're going for, right? Like, and I think that's super important. I'm really happy that y'all went that direction with it, because I think my last thought before I think maybe we get final thoughts and wrap is we're dealing with a problem of like overvaluing kind of the money angle of this stuff. And like Jesse, I think you pointed to something really important, which is like investing in stuff because it's worth its salt is like not the same as like investing in something because there's a return on investment like analysis, right? It's like there's a different methodology when you're just trying to keep a thing going because the value to the world is just that it exists. And we're struggling on the left with like an overabundance of projects that are about what is the return on investment for this funder, for this person, for this, donor, whatever it might be. And that is destroying our movement, right? Like, what if people could just show up to a comedy show and be in community and like laugh a lot and like it's not about what's the profitability of this long term?
Sorry, not to interrupt, but that is a return on investment. So I completely agree with what you're saying. I think it's about reframing things. It's not like I think we're living in this like technocratic age of funding where it's like ROI is seen only as a calculated metric or like some sort of project specific goal. Movements and narratives take time to build. You can't measure that on a 9-month grant making cycle. So we need to rethink how we're considering return on investment. What are you like? Your return can't be measured potentially for a generation. So what does that mean?
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. I love that reframe because it is like, it is actually valuable in itself. Yeah. And I think there's just so many fun ways that like comedy can change people's hearts and minds. And I'm like super pumped and happy that y'all joined us for this episode. I'm super pumped and happy with like the work that you're doing. I think it's going to be valuable for our movement that's fighting against so many heavy, horrible things from authoritarianism to a shrinking left to suppression to all these things, right? Like, got activists that are now getting sued and having to pay out like $600 million. Like, this
Oh,
is,
you talking about the Greenpeace?
yeah,
Yeah, that was crazy, right?
it's nuts. Like, and we can't joke about that, but we've got to figure out a way to like move through that. And so I think that this is like a really great outlet for people to like show up and just be able to learn how to move through difficult topics rather than avoiding it. So with that, I'm wondering maybe we can start off with you, Z, and then close out with you, Jesse, on final thoughts. Like, what do you want people to engage with? What are you like hoping for out of this in the future? Or yeah, just like what are you feeling in your heart right now?
I think in terms of uh like these sorts of shows, I would be really happy to see a normalization of engagement with these issues that you don't need to be, I guess, what would you call it, a specialist? Like you don't need to be someone who has who's maybe dedicated the past 15, 20 years of your life to these issues, and that your involvement in a movement that really does affect you is something that is accessible to you, and that feels normal to do, and feels like you're not going it alone, and that there's also fun and joy to be had in that. And I think that for me, that's one of the goals of doing this shows, is not feeling like, yeah, movement involvement is something that is separate from everyone in society, except a select few, like Nate was talking about, except 10 people in one of these organizations.
Love that. Well, now the organizer in me is going to come out. I'm going to wrap up with some CTAs. Fun. Buy a ticket to our show for Earth Day on April 22nd. It's going to be amazing. You're going to really have a good time. You're going to see exactly what we're talking about. It's going to be great. Also, I would say if any of your talented, creative, incredible listeners have ideas for climate comedy projects, we are hoping to make this show a really inclusive space. We've used the term incubator a lot. And I think, Z, going back to your point about barriers to entry and a lot of the sort of traditional comedic gatekeepers, we want to kind of flip that on its head. So if you have an idea and you want to try to put it on its feet, some stand-up jokes, a sketch, a song, whatever you have going on, please feel free to email or DM us on Instagram. We're hoping that this will be a show that has a full spectrum of talent emerging to established, and we'd love to hear from you.
And then maybe we can do a little round robin before I close of like, who's your favorite comedy person right now?
Ooh, that's a good.
I just went to see, it's hard to say favorite, but I will say I just went to see Chris Fleming's latest tour. I've loved Chris for a long time. It was incredible. Chris, I hope you hear this.
Chris, become a listener.
Chris, do you want to be my friend?
We'll make this in a matchmaking show as well at the end.
Yeah.
What about you, Z?
Man, that's a tough question. Favorite's definitely hard. I was just talking to someone about how I was hoping that I know that Hannibal Buress just bought this comedy club in Brooklyn. I've been a big fan of his for a while, and so it's like I was just talking to someone about that. I was like, man, like I'd love him to put out another special sometime soon, man. I'm a big Hannibal Buress fan. On maybe the less, notorious or mainstream section, there's an improv group that I really love called Centralia, which does a lot of really honestly psychedelic, trippy, really funny, cool, artsy stuff. And they just had a show last night and they're awesome. So if you ever have a chance to go to one of their shows, I think they're really great too.
I've never heard of them, but that sounds really cool.
Yeah.
I think like we just rewatched Broad City, and
Oh,
I'm
yeah.
like still blown away at how good that show is.
Yeah.
Like from beginning to end, it's just like
Yeah.
one of the best, honestly. I have two because I also can't pick. I throw out a question that like is impossible for me to even answer. But right now, like I love Ron Funches. I feel like his comedic timing is so good and so fun, and he's just such a weird batch of humor. And then James Acaster, who's like a British comedian and does just like the best, like those like long arc jokes. Like he's just like one of the best at like he will take an entire show to come back around to like that joke that he started with, which I love. What about you, Eric? I feel like you got some good ones too.
I feel like I don't have a good one right now,
What?
but
Lame.
I
Failure.
do think it's funny to watch the reaction to Bill Burr just talking shit about Elon Musk and how it's got, speaking of how sensitive the right wing comedy crowd is, being so upset that like he's gone woke because he's pointing out that this billionaire sucks, which I think is really funny. And then I think just relatively speaking, I would say I really enjoy Jesse and Zevon compared to Nate, who is extremely disappointing and would have been way cooler if he had been arrested earlier. And then he would have been one of my favorite local comedians. But because he wasn't, and he showed up late and left early, I'd put you two much higher.
Thank you.
Thank you. Keep that in the final edit, Nate. You heard it
For
here
sure.
first.
Yeah.
Yeah, Nate, suck it. Just kidding. That was rude. I don't know why I said that.
Also,
Take that out.
one of my favorite comics, can I do a plug?
Yeah.
Steve
Please.
on himself. Okay.
Yeah.
You guys go to his Instagram, his TikTok, the parody videos he's doing, making fun of these like weird right wing influencer types.
Thank you. I
You got to see
appreciate
it.
that. Thanks. Yeah, you got to be on your grind set, and I think like
You gotta.
taking a page out of any hustle guru's book. I mean, maybe it'll make people laugh. Maybe people will be inspired to work, 80 hours a week at a multi-level marketing firm. That's
More.
yeah, more. I mean,
Honestly,
More.
honestly, my day starts at 6:00. My day 2 starts at 6:05.
boom.
And then it's day 3, 6:05 to 6:10. Like I am
Okay, that's actually
constantly on
disgusting
my
to me.
grind.
I start at 4 a.m. Okay. So those
My
2 hours
gosh.
that you're sleeping, that's money on the table.
Yeah, you've had 7 days before I even wake up. It's fucking incredible.
Z,
Honestly,
what's the thing you did about the guy who always swallows his gum?
Yeah, I just well, because I don't want to waste the time that it's gonna take to spit that shit out, bro. That's time That's time where I could be. That's time where I could be hustling, bro.
Yeah.
I'm not trying to
Also,
do that.
also you fill up your stomach, so then you don't have to eat as
You
much.
don't have to eat. You know what I mean? For 7 years, real shit.
That's why I swallow seeds, because then a plant will grow inside me. That's gonna fill me up for a lifetime. I'm actually completely nourishing myself off of 3 watermelon seeds and 1 sunflower seed. Fully nourished. Well, before this goes completely off the rails and loses all of its inspirational methodology, yeah, I just want to say thank you again to Z and Jesse and not Nate for joining us for this episode of Upon Request. You have to go to Apo.Ha-Ha.calypse.
Boom. That was
Oh
it.
my gosh, I finally did it. I finally did it. Oh, amazing. If you're not in New York, you should be following along and seeing if there's other cool events popping up. I think that there's been some really cool partnerships out in LA, and maybe there will be more in other places. And remind yourself that you don't got to be perfect to be excellent. Show up in the best way that you can and keep on trying to show up. We have a crisis on our hands, and we're not unserious about the crisis, but we are going to enjoy ourselves in this one life we've got to live. So, with that, thank you all so much for listening and have a great evening.